I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Byron Reese, a serial entrepreneur with a quarter century of experience building and running successful technology companies with multiple acquisitions and IPOs along the way. He's an award-winning author, speaker, and futurist who holds many technology patents and has started 2 podcasts about artificial intelligence. He currently serves the CEO of J.J. Kent Incorporated, a venture-backed tech company that recently launched Scissortail.ai, a proprietary AI tool set to inform new product and listing strategies. Bloomberg Businessweek credits Byron with having quietly pioneered a new breed of media company. The Financial Times of London reported that he's typical of the new wave of internet entrepreneurs out to turn the economics of the media industry on its head. Byron and his work have been featured in hundreds of news outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, Entrepreneur, USA Today, Reader's Digest, NPR, and the LA Times Magazine. Byron graduated magna cum laude from Rice University with a degree in honors economics and is the author of several books, including The Fourth Age, Wasted, Infinite Progress, and his newest book, Are Agora, which we'll be discussing today. So Byron, welcome back. I am really, really excited to have you with me again today, sir.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm so glad to be here.
Every now and then I come across an idea so simple, elegant, and powerful that it just blows my mind. And the thesis of your latest book does exactly that, with the argument that humans are part of a collective superorganism called Agora. Can you give me a bird's eye view of the concept?
Superorganism is a creature made up of other creatures. That's a short sentence, but a big idea. And most people picture it like a beehive. Bees are made of cells like we are, but the bees come together and form a hive, and the hive is a superorganism. It's an actual animal. It's not a metaphor for an animal. It is an animal. It has different properties than any bee has. It's warm-blooded. Bees are cold-blooded. The hive's warm-blooded. It has a longer lifespan. It has different goals. It has a memory. So it becomes, if it were all self-contained in a body, you wouldn't have any trouble looking at it and saying that's an animal. Because the bees kind of can move around, you look at it and you're like, well, it's not really an animal. But what a superorganism is or can be that. It doesn't have a physical body. Like the difference between hormones and pheromones, they're the same things. One are inside your body and one are external. So when ants lay down pheromones that other ants read, it's functionally equivalent to your body using hormones that your different cells read. So the question that I posed in this book is, if a bunch of bees come together and form a hive, and that hive is an animal, do a bunch of humans come together and form an animal? A literal one, not a metaphysical concept, but an actual biological animal. And if so, how could we know that? And if we could know it, what do we know about it? And what would it want? What would its goals be?
So what you just touched on is, I think, the key point. It is not a metaphor. And once people stop for a moment, pause, and think that through, this idea just grabs them. And that's what it did for me. It is so big and powerful in terms of ideas. Let me get into the book, which is called Are Agora, How Humanity Functions as a Single Superorganism That Shapes Our World and Our Future. And I believe this is your 4th major publication after your previous books, Fourth Age, Wasted, and Infinite Progress. So those are primarily focused on innovation, technology, AI, and accelerating change. I'm wondering, what led you down this different path to write Are Agora?
Well, there actually is another book in there that was published that came out before the Agora book. And it's called Stories, Dice, and Rocks That Think. And what that book tried to ask the question is why are people so different than animals? Why did we have such a different outcome than animals did? Because however you want to regard a porpoise's intelligence or whatever, you have to look around this planet and say we had something different. Like we have civilization, cities, and people, just a whole, we're like aliens to everything else. And so I wanted to write a book about why we were different, what is different about us. And in that book, I touched on this idea, But I didn't know. I didn't know what I thought about it. I didn't know if I thought it was a metaphor or actually an animal. And so I decided I want to write an entire book about it. And my way of thinking of it was, if I'm arguing it is a scientific idea, well, one way we do science is we put forth falsifiable hypotheses. Could I make statements that were falsifiable that would suggest we are a superorganism? And I make a number of them. Superorganisms, for instance, the parts can't live apart from the whole. Well, can people live apart from society? Superorganisms don't allow for much individuality. Like, you have to follow these algorithms or it doesn't function. And then you say, well, people are kind of different. Is that true about us? So I went through a list of these hypotheses, and every one of them suggested to me that it is actually a living creature. And you can never know that for certain, but I think it is. Like, I think the overwhelming evidence of the book supports the idea that it is an actual animal. You can ask, is it conscious? And that's a wonderful conversation, I think, by your notes we'll get into. But just, is it a biological entity? Can I go down that path just a little longer? Or
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
absolutely.
probably the best way to think about a superorganism that isn't is alien to a human is to think about themselves. So if a superorganism is an animal made up of other animals, by that definition, humans are superorganisms.
Yeah.
Cells are alive, but the interesting thing about cells is they aren't made of anything living. They are the primary unit of life. They are made of non-living things, and they are alive. And that's a big mystery, but let's just take it at face value. Cells are alive. Every cell lives its whole body, its whole life, oblivious to you, by the way. It grows old and raises a family and everything, and then it dies, and it doesn't know anything about you. And then somehow or another, there's also you, and you're made of cells, but you aren't a cell. And you don't even feel like a bunch of cells. You don't feel like an apartment complex. It's not what it feels like to be a person. You feel like a unity, a single creature. There's just you. So how is it that those cells occupy matter, live and die and grow old, but somehow there's a you as well that occupies it? And the analogy I use in the book is about one of those posters. Maybe you've seen these. And you see a poster on the wall, and it's a puppy. But when you squint in really closely at it and look really carefully, you see that the pixels aren't dots. They're actually tiny photos of puppies with different colors and all of that. And they come together to form that big one. So the pattern exists at two levels, at the cell level and at the U level. There are two different patterns superimposed on the same matter. And so you're a superorganism. And so much of the book is about wrestling with that. Like, and what I know why a cell is alive. It's less clear why you are alive, why a person is alive. What are we if we're not cells? We're a creature made of cells. So what we are is a different pattern, a different organization of this. And so the question I was trying to pose is, does that exist one more level up? There's no reason it would stop. There's no reason a bunch of cells make a person. Why wouldn't a bunch of people make a superorganism? Why wouldn't a bunch of superorganisms make a bigger one? Every layer that you can get emergent properties from, that new capabilities come about, is a whole different level of existence. What's fascinating about people is you have about 250 different kinds of cells in your body, and each of them does a different thing. And it's those 250 different cells, each doing their own thing, that forms you. Well, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics tracks 10,000 human jobs. So we'll just use that number. There's 10,000. There are taxi drivers and bricklayers, and 10,000 different jobs. And those people go about their business. And what's interesting, of course, is two bricklayers can have a conversation, and they can work together, and because they have algorithms that they both use pretty much, a lot identically. And so there's a lot of things that feel like the same. And then all of those different cells, those 10,000 different jobs, all those people come together and they form this new creature. Your cells, bees only live a few weeks. A beehive can live 100 years. Your cells only live a few days. You can live 100 years. Every level higher typically is a much longer lifespan. And so Agora's lifespan is, I think, millions of years, or if not billions. And your cells can't perceive you directly. When you cut your finger and your platelets run off to clot it, they're not like, he cut his finger again. Let's go clot that. Help me put the Band-Aid on it. They just do their thing oblivious to you. And that's what we do. By living our lives, we and just doing our thing, running off and clotting the blood or whatever our function is, we give rise to this higher level of order. And what I love about it, and I think we might get at this at the end, what I love about it is it offers a scientific answer to the question, why are we here? And science historically does not like why questions. Science loves how questions. How does this happen? How did this work? Why is a hard one for science. And I think this offers a scientific explanation for why we are here. And it is in part wrapped up in my last book, which is, why is there just one of us? Why are there just one species like us on this planet?
Life forms can exist on multiple levels, as you've just pointed out, right? And superorganisms are all around us. Dogs, cats, puppies, composed of smaller pictures of puppies. All of those things are superorganisms that are composed of cells. So everything that we see around us on a day-to-day basis is already a superorganism, which really just proves the basis of the thesis. And what's interesting is the key to a superorganism seems to be that it's a self-sustaining structure that's composed of smaller organisms. So again, a person is made of cells. A city is made of people, as you pointed out. So are countries, regions, and territories. So not only can superorganisms scale, but one of the things that I think you've described in the book is that they can be nested within each other, right? And so you can have these different scales of superorganism that contain each other. Is that kind of accurate to say?
100%.
So on some level, maybe humans are aware that we're part of a larger organism. Writers seek immortality by keeping their ideas alive in others. Families take in orphans despite not having any direct evolutionary benefit to it. Every major religious tradition on earth teaches people the value of cooperation of some kind or another to reinforce collective behaviors. Could the concept of Agora in a sense, be a form of recognition that humanity, as we describe it, is something greater than just a metaphor?
I believe that, yes. I mean, you list great examples with all of those. The big one that's like what you just said is altruism in general. Darwin saw altruism as a problem for evolutionary theory because you can imagine, so there are these shrieker monkeys. These exist. And if there's a threat and a shrieker monkey sees like a cheetah coming towards the group, it'll shriek, and warn everybody. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, it would seem that if you're a shrieker monkey, your best strategy is to keep your mouth shut. Don't shriek, because you just draw attention to yourself. The cheetah pounces on you. But you're all for everybody else shrieking. Right? And so if that really worked, then all the I call them Iago in the book, the Iago shrieker monkeys who were just out for themselves, they would live and reproduce, and then all the monkeys would be out for themselves. And shrieking as a benevolent behavior, as an altruistic behavior, would go away because the shriekers all get eaten and don't reproduce. And so bees do the same kind of thing, right? A bee will attack a threat even though it kills the bee, but it does it to further the hive. And that's because for a superorganism to evolve, it's like you. Your cells have to evolve and be able to live. But you're also evolving along as well. So both levels have to evolve an ability to survive and reproduce at every level. So the individual person has to survive and reproduce, but society has to as well. And that's where altruism would come in and other things like you just named. Those are behaviors that further the survival of the superorganism, even though they don't at the individual level.
Well, yeah, and you'd mentioned that some of these events are actually negative for the individual level, right? But positive for the larger organism. I also wanted to ask if things like mass hysteria events, like crowd psychology, I guess, things like that, fad trends might be emergent aspects of the Agora superorganism. In simple terms, humans tend to do the same silly, sometimes crazy things at the same time. And I'm wondering if maybe the trends or patterns that drive Agora are connected to these behaviors, right? Almost like a feedback loop, the way that cells are regulated by hormones in the body.
I don't write about that in the book, but I think that's entirely right. A beehive can get sick. The beehive can get sick. The beehive can develop fears. Um, and you don't ever have to think the beehive is conscious, like that it's thinking. You just have to think, okay, it behaves like a living creature. And what that means is that it behaves in ways that further its reproduction and its survival. But that doesn't mean it's perfect. And so it can have neuroses. It can, if it gets attacked 2 or 3 times by, brown dogs, it can just decide it doesn't like brown dogs. It'll have a memory of that. And it will attack brown dogs. Um, and that's perfectly reasonable without you having to imagine the beehive thinking, I don't like brown dogs. It just that bees that attacked brown dogs. Anyway, so yes, I think those could be, they're one of two things. They're either bugs, essentially, they're errors that will self-correct because they'll eventually self-correct. The body, when it gets sick, heals, usually, or doesn't, but it heals. And so either they're that, or they serve some function that we are not aware of. There's no reason we would be aware of it. We're smart, but a drop of water cannot contemplate the ocean. We can't. We can't know. We're not smarter than Agora. I guarantee that. No person can build a smartphone, but Agora can build a smartphone. No person can put somebody on the moon, but Agora put somebody on the moon.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Well, so I wanted to get into a couple of more speculative questions because for me, this is the part where it starts to get really interesting. One of these, this is a step a bit farther out, but I think that we've all had what we might describe as psychic or consciousness events, right? Like dreams that come true, and the phone rings when you're thinking about someone, things like that. Premonitions, clairvoyance, other reported phenomena that just can't be explained, and yet almost all of us have experienced. Do you think that those might be a hint at an individual level of what might be happening in Agora?
I don't write about that in the book, but certainly. I mean, if you're posing the question the way you are, I assume you know Jung and collective consciousness, and there are all kinds of studies that suggest that. Um, People, yes, I have no problems with that. We don't. Science is an amazing tool set, and I consider myself a science writer. But science has a simple idea that for something to be scientifically true, it has to be measurable and reproducible.
Yeah.
If you can't measure it, it may be true. So John Steinbeck wrote about this fish, and he said, when you catch a fish and you put it in a jar, a solution of like a lab test, whatever the jar is with the solution in it, he said, you have recorded many truths about that thing, its weight and its size and all of these true things. But there's a lot of things you didn't record. You didn't record how it fought or what it tasted like, or it's not, or whether you can look at it and tell it's alive or dead. All these things about it that science just doesn't have instrumentation for. So if science doesn't have instrumentation for something, what it should be is agnostic and just say, I don't know. What it typically is dismissive and says, well, there's no evidence for that. Ergo, it's not true. when it really should be saying there's no evidence for that, so I have no opinion one way or the other. Um,
Yeah.
and so I believe that there is all kinds of stuff going on that we just simply don't have instrumentation to measure. And what we have trained ourselves to do is to say, well, maybe it's not really true then. But there's no reason to think that. There's no reason that all natural phenomenon are by definition measurable. There's just no reason to think that. They aren't. I think a lot about, for the longest time, up until 1802, nobody knew where meteorites came from. And the idea that they fell out of the sky was considered ridiculous and pseudoscience. So, I mean, Thomas Jefferson said that was ridiculous. It's the craziest idea that rocks fall out of the sky. And then there was this big meteor shower, this big asteroid hit above France. All these people saw it, broke up in all these pieces. They rained down. The French Academy came out there, picked up all these pieces, talked to 1,000 people, and they're like, well, lo and behold, rocks fall out of the sky. And that would be that kind of thing. There would have been no reason to think rocks could have fallen out of the sky until one day we saw them. And then but that was true.
Well, the Agora concept makes us question a lot of things that we take for granted, right? Especially in terms of consciousness, intelligence, and qualia, this property that we can't describe in humans, and yet we all know it happens, right? And these are emergent processes in superorganisms. So when you think about it, I mean, as this collection of semi-independent organisms, something about all of our cells comes together, and it's the planning and structure and coordination that leads to this larger intelligence and qualia, this experience of consciousness that we all have, and yet none of us can explain. And that opens the door for me to the question of whether Agora itself is conscious. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I love that question. I wrote an entire book on whether computers could be conscious. And to put it in simple terms, a thermometer is you can measure a temperature of something, but like a bathtub, bath water, but it never feels warm. When you get in the bath, you have an experience of warmth. And so we can describe that. But what you just said is science doesn't have any framework for explaining why matter, simple matter, can experience something. It's called the last great scientific question we don't even know how to ask scientifically.
Yeah.
And yet we know it. So there's a number of theories on it. Now, if consciousness comes about from complexity, which I think is implicit in your question, and that's a big if. So there are people who think a cell is, a billionth is conscious, but has this tiny drop of consciousness in it because it's got a little complexity, so it's got a little bit, but not hardly any. And as you get more complex creatures, they become more conscious. That's a belief. There's another belief that as you get more and more complex, you get this new emergent level. And what emergence is when you get some new thing. So a bunch of gears can't tell the time. They can't track time. You put a bunch of gears together and you make a clock, and the clock keeps time. None of the gears can keep time, but the clock does. So that's another view, is that you get more and more complex, and then at some point, ta-da, it gels, and you get us. There are other theories. But if either of those is true, then Agora is certainly conscious, because it is much more complex than us. If consciousness doesn't come from complexity, it could be you have a soul, and that's what's conscious, or whatever, then I don't know. I don't know if it is. But if it comes from complexity, that is a much more complex creature than we are.
Well, and I wanted to build off that and touch on whether the conscious aspect of Agora may be changing, whether it might be becoming more conscious over time. So in your description in our past interview, you'd said that the internet itself would not qualify as a superorganism, right? Because it's a machine. It's not a living organism composed of living organisms. But I have wondered if it might function as a nervous system for Agora. And that, for me, brings up another question. From time to time, people ask, what if the internet wakes up, right? There's always been this speculation on whether the complexity of computer networks could become self-aware. And from everything that we've seen, all the indicators say no, that's not happening. That hasn't happened. Potentially at some point in the future, AI will get complex enough that it will do it. But the internet itself, no. But what is interesting about that question for me in the context of Agora is since those computer networks ultimately connect people to each other, I'm wondering if the internet empowers Agora towards greater self-awareness. So, if Agora has been this entity with maybe a small amount of latent consciousness, if the internet is the nervous system for it, could Agora be more conscious, smarter, and able to perform better in real time because of that?
Yes. So I want you asked two questions there. One is Agora maturing or growing or getting more conscious? I think it's very hard to explain human history in a cogent. We all kind of know people don't change. Like if you take a newborn baby and you raise them in a different culture, they'd be like that culture. If you took a newborn baby and sent them back 500 years, they would be. People don't really change much, but civilization changes a lot. Like we used to be real cruel. Now you can say we're still cruel, but we used to torture people for amusement, for crowds. In 12th century France, there was a pastime called cat burning. So they would build a big fire and they would throw a live animal in it and watch them scream and die. And that was fun. People thought, oh, great. I could horrify people with historic tales of not how bad we were, but how common it was and how accepted it was. And now we're not. And I think, at least most of us aren't, and I think that is Agora maturing. I think it's growing up and it's learning and it thinks now and it has empathy and all of these things. I also like to think the goth period was it going through its goth phase. But to answer your other question about the internet, absolutely. So the best analogy would be speech. So you have a bunch of people who live together. If they don't have speech, it's very hard for them to put a person on the moon or make a smartphone or something. So we had to, but speech is just a technology. That's all it is. It's a data exchange protocol. I can convey data to you. I can send it to you with speech. I can say it. And I can tell you, don't eat that purple berry. And what might have taken you, a human, 100,000 years to evolve, you in 5 seconds know not to eat it. You just evolved 100,000 years, 5 seconds, because this mutation I sent you. You were going to eat that berry, and I said, don't eat that berry, it'll make you sick. And then you didn't. So you just had this new mutation. It came to you because you heard it. And so the internet is a form of communication. And it's a data exchange protocol, and it sends information around. So if I can tell you one sentence gave you 1 million years of evolution, internet will evolve us by eons, every day. Well, we couldn't evolve all the things we know naturally in trillions and trillions of years. That we could not evolve. Think about everything you know that you've learned. And pretend you didn't learn that. You had to evolve it. Well, that would take more time than the universe will ever even live. So absolutely, the internet is a technology Agora uses extensively.
Well, Byron, on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. It has truly been a pleasure and, again, a tremendous honor having you with me. This is such a big and powerful idea. We should probably leave it here for today. This is going to give people a ton to digest. Again, this is one of those ideas, for me, when it grabs you, it really grabs you, and it forces you to really think about our place in the universe and our place in this larger tapestry of the human experience, I guess.
May
So,
I have 30 seconds to say what I conclude from it all, how we should live?
absolutely, absolutely.
So that's really the question is, if you know this, how would your life be different? I think that superorganisms don't thrive because there's one or two bees who do most of the work. Superorganisms thrive because all the bees live their life and they do their thing. I tell a story in the book about this man who committed suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge in 1947. And this psychologist who studied suicide went up there and went to his apartment and looked around and found he had left a note, even though he didn't have any family or anything, he left a note. And the note said, "I'm going to walk to the bridge now. If one person smiles at me along the way, I will not jump." And clearly nobody smiled at him along the way. And I think a lot of people have a lot of angst that they don't feel like they're doing enough, or they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders, and that they think they should do more with their life, or they don't know what they should do with their life. And the answer, if we are a superorganism, is you should just try to be kinder to people. Every day, just be a tiny bit better than you were before, and live your life, and do what you do. And help other people. That's what superorganisms do. The bees, they work in cooperation, and they're able to do everything. So Agora can do anything as long as we all just live our lives. And so I put no heavier burden on people than just try to be kind and live your life. And you are a part of this giant story. And you are a part of this wonderful creature and all it can do.
That's a wonderful, wonderful note to close on. I also want to ask, though, before we go, again, what you were working on next, how this idea is progressing, if you're working on any future books, and what we can look for in terms of headlines from your work in the next few months.
I write books about things I don't know much about, anything about. That sounds like a line, but it isn't. I mean, I get interested in something and I research it, and then I get eager to share it with other people. And I think by writing, so I start to write it, and then I edit it and work on it. So I'm really interested in that story I told at the beginning about meteors, and that we didn't know where they came from, and then the idea that fell out of the sky. And I wonder if there's a lot of pseudoscience or supernatural things or all these things that science dismisses, that it might just be dismissing that they aren't supernatural or anything. They're completely naturalistic. We just don't understand them. So I want to try to understand possible explanations for things that look supernatural, but maybe aren't. Maybe they're just plain old science that they're just rocks that fall out of the sky and we just didn't know it. Isaac Newton came along and he said, man, Aristotle said nothing can affect anything else at a distance. That's impossible. And then Isaac Newton came along and he said, wow, the moon pulls the oceans of the earth. And people are like, that's crazy. That's superstition. And he's like, that's mysticism. And he's like, no, it's science. I don't understand it, but I'm just saying it's science, and we just don't know how. And I have a feeling there's a lot of stuff like that is perfectly scientific, but is dismissed because we can't explain it. So we just are like, well, that's not real.
Wonderful. Let me thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you.